Brian Kelly met with the media yesterday. I thought had some pretty interesting things to say on the roster side of things. We'll get into some of that sound. But while we're here right now, I just want to we'll kind of address the situation that Brian Kelly felt necessary to address yesterday when he initially met with the media. Before he got into the purpose of the press conference, as he described it, which was to talk about the transfer portal ads and the new staff additions, he felt it necessary to address the Greg Brooks story on Good Morning America. I can't imagine many of y'all missed that story. But if you did, Greg Brooks and his father were on Good Morning America with Michael Strahan in a taped segment, and they spoke about Greg's situation from being a defensive back at LSU to the symptoms that he was undergoing to eventually the diagnosis and the brain cancer and the surgery to remove it, and then the recovery and the road that he's been on since. And while, as I mentioned yesterday, none of what was in the Good Morning America interview was completely earth-shattering from a new factual perspective. It was just shedding more light on Greg's current situation by showing video of him in his day-to-day life, and then obviously the Q&A portion where Greg is compromised in his speech. He's compromised with his motor skills. He's in a wheelchair, and his speech is compromised as well. And so that was something that you could read about but didn't see until Good Morning America took the opportunity to sit down with him. But the big quote that came out from that sit-down was Greg Brooks Sr., father of Greg Brooks, saying that they had not heard from anyone in LSU's football department since October of 2023, just after the diagnosis, especially Brian Kelly. And then Greg Brooks Sr. went on to say, like, hey, man, why couldn't you just pick up the phone, tell my kid you love him, like he's a player on your team? And the inference that I certainly made was, like, Brian Kelly never spoke to Greg Brooks again once he had brain surgery. And I mean, how would I know? I'm not there with Brian Kelly. I wasn't there with Greg Brooks. We're just listening to what is being said. And Brian Kelly immediately went to the mic before he made any sort of statement about the transfer portal class or took a single question. He went to the podium and said, look, like, I want to address something that is categorically false. I was present during Greg's recovery. I was there multiple times, and someone within LSU's football department was there nearly every single day. And he said that the statement touched a nerve with him. And that is interesting. We're not, I don't think, going to learn any facts from it, and I'm not here to really draw any further conclusions from that. I'm just here to say that it's interesting that one party suggests one thing vehemently and the other party completely disagrees. This is not ancient history. This is not something that you would have forgotten about at this point. Certainly, Greg's word, Greg Jr.'s word may be tough to take when when he's under the medical care that he is and going through the intense surgeries and recovery that he did. But the family, I would think, would have a reasonable understanding of how often Brian Kelly and/or members of the LSU football staff were at the hospital in the most trying days of their life. So that, to me, is interesting. And again, I'm not here to say this person is right, to say that person is right, because there's no way for me to know. But it is interesting to bring up. And Brian Kelly said, look, you can criticize me as a coach. You can criticize the plays that we call. You can criticize the recruits that we bring in. You can criticize the results on the field. But once you come off the field, that line is drawn very clearly. And he felt like his character was under attack. He felt like his relationships with his players were under the microscope and being questioned. And he felt it necessary to come out and make a very, very strong statement, and he did. So I'm curious if there's going to be a follow-up. Now, I'll tell you all this from a journalistic perspective because I'm dipping my toe back into those waters now with LouisianaSports.net and doing a little bit of – I would hesitate to call it reporting on a day-to-day basis. We were the first ones to write a story online about Omar the Tiger coming, which is not exactly hard-hitting news, but we had that up on the website. And there's a bit of me that is trying to find out some information here and there about some things. But I'll tell you all this, if you're looking for some sort of further development on that. LSU football is pretty reserved with off-season headlines and press conferences. Spring football's coming up in a month, and Brian Kelly will meet with the media from time to time there. If you're going to hear something further on this issue, then it's going to come from Greg Brooks' camp. And I'm not sure who's in position or desires to ask that question or wants a comment or a rebuttal to what Brian Kelly had to say. But I think you've probably heard the end of it from LSU's side, unless Brian Kelly feels like he's under attack once again and feels the need to, quote-unquote, and I use that term fairly lightly, defend himself from this, what he would determine as categorically false claim. So I found that to be, it's not often. And look, I choose to live in a world surrounded by sports. I'm about to talk to an actor and comedian about goofy stuff in sports, and that's the world that I've chosen to live in. It's the world I'm interested in. I don't like politics. I don't like drama. Hard news is not necessarily my favorite thing in the world. I don't love turning on a lot of the news networks, whether national, internet, whatever the case may be. I don't love talking about that kind of stuff. As little fun as talking about the basketball team shooting 1,000,000 threes yesterday is because they played poorly and lost. I don't like dabbling in real life stuff, especially when you deal with the situation like one that Greg Brooks Jr. is in right now. But it is relevant, and it is something that I felt the need to bring up and talk about here on this show. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but to completely sweep that under the rug, I think would have been misguided on our part. So you look at it, it's a horrible situation any way you look at it, because what's truly not as important as who visited the hospital on what day for how many hours under whose watch and who remembers what really matters is that Greg Brooks is going through such a very, very difficult time in his life, and no young person should have to deal with that. And that's something that Greg is still recovering from and dealing with every single day. And that's the most important thing. So you can get caught up in the back and forth into who was doing what and who said what and who was responsible for what, and that's all something the court system will deal with and something that we'll cover as it becomes relevant. But it's just, to me, as I look at it from 30,000 feet, okay, that's a new quote we need to address, but also at the same time, it's just a horrible situation for a young person to have to deal with the things that Greg Brooks is dealing with. So certainly my best and our best here to him as he continues to recover, and hopefully he can move forward as well as humanly possible.
Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.